in this profession, more than 65 professionally, to be honest about it, in the field of nutritional science. And I've come to a point of view that is kind of on the edge for a lot of folks, but I've nonetheless become enthusiastic about it. Namely, we tend to think of nutrition on a nutrient by nutrient basis. What exactly this nutrient does, what that one does. We talk about it in the context of we need exactly this amount to be recommended, this amount for minimum intake and so forth. And that has been the narrative, the system within which we've lived. And each nutrient is studied to death, in the laboratory as to all the things it does, all the so-called mechanisms that it interacts with. And so we have an enormous body of data that does involve individual nutrients. I had finally gotten to a point, and my own research sort of educated me on this, my students, my postdocs, and so forth. Namely, there is no such thing, or it's been vastly overrated, I should say that there is a single mechanism to account for the effect of a single nutrient, acting as if it's acting independently. I don't believe that, and there's lots of ways to sort of address that question. Nutrients interact with each other. They interact with each other. So what we might discover in a test tube, if you will, or whether we're looking at nutrients being given, let's say in a trial, a human trial, when we give it alone by itself, let's say a supplement, it doesn't necessarily behave in the same way. In fact, it may go in the opposite way from what we would think it does when we're consuming a whole food. So I really, that comment together with, in our research, I kind of worked inside of the cell as a biochemist, trying to understand, how does this work? How does that work? Particularly on animal protein, if you will, or protein in general. And I was looking for the mechanism by which in the laboratory it was so effective in increasing carcinogenesis. So I looked for a mechanism, we found one. We looked for another one, they still found one. That kept going on, and it was almost like it was a doctoral dissertation, each one of these. And it proceeded over 10, 12 years or more. Finally got to a point, I couldn't put my finger on any particular mechanism and say, that's it. It just didn't make sense. So then I became aware of some of the dynamics of metabolic control. I became aware, of course, I was teaching some of this stuff too, in this very reductionist way. And I sort of got to the point where there's something grand happening inside the cell, in the sense that each nutrient becomes involved with other nutrients that's being consumed at the same time. Each nutrient has multiple mechanisms. In fact, we found 10. Every single one of them went in the direction of creating cancer. Two of the activity of 8 of them was in upwards, but that meant cancer. 2 of them actually declined its activity, but those are the mechanisms that are there for protecting us. And I said, wait a minute, this is amazing. 10 times out of 10. And we can't put a finger on the mechanism. And then coming to realization that in the metabolic control mechanisms that operate, in these schemes of things, there's something much more going on here. So that's when I came up with that word, wholism, with a W, with a W. And then thinking about the larger context too, in terms of the kind of food we consume to get all these nutrients, if you will, that nature has provided to us, that really got me on the track of focusing on the plant-based foods, as the best means to obtain the kind of nutrients that we should consume. Not just to create one effect or affect one disease. All of a sudden it became apparent, it's not just cancer was the area I was working in, but then I started looking at the literature and finding stuff too that addressed a lot of other outcomes as well. So the Wholism Concept operated at the cellular level and went on to the outcome level, and it involved everything in between. And so now I feel like I'm very comfortable, maybe too cocky, I don't know, about the idea that this is the way nutrition should be defined. It's not a question of learning about the details of each and every nutrient or the specific amounts that should be consumed, et cetera. It's about, because there's always these metabolic control mechanisms that keep things in order. It operates like a symphony, word I've used often. Now, having said all that, in the journal, I know there's a tendency for almost everyone who's working in nutrition to end up talking about a single nutrient.
Hmm.
What does it do? Where's the mechanism? How much maybe should we consume? The same old story, the same old, it's been going on for a long time. I would like to suggest that the journal have a section in there at least. Maybe it could start out with an editorial. I'd volunteer to write an editorial, on this concept, to just attract it, just to bring attention to the idea that we're talking about whole food here, folks. We really are. And because that in turn, once we grasp that idea and have it in mind, it's amazing the implications that has for, let's say, public health, the implications it has for medical practice. Both of you guys, you're the clinical. I know this is contentious. Let's face it, kind of contentious to think this way. But I'm going to suggest that this is where this is the sort of the impediment that the field of medicine has in really understanding nutrition. Because if the medical community itself, and correct me if I'm overstating the case here, but the medical community is focused on individual things, all the way from individual nutrients to individual drugs, to individual diseases. That's the way the system works. And so that's where, let's say, that's where the business is. That's where it is. And so I would argue that the more this information, these detailed information we create, sounds great, builds up journals. But in reality, it's that's not health. Human health is the alternative, which fits in with the thing that both of you have been working on, the lifestyle medicine concept. So I've said enough. I didn't make so long, but I did want to argue that maybe having an editorial for starters, this, and then thinking about some cutting edge things, or getting people to think about this in the context of this is really fundamental to lifestyle medicine.